Hello and welcome to today's webinar. Is your immutable backup really immutable? This event is brought to you in partnership with our friends at Druva. Thanks so much for joining us on the webinar today. We've got a great event lined up. This is going to be an exciting presentation, and I'll be introducing you to our expert presenter here in just a moment. But before we do that, there's just a few things that you should know about this event. My name is David Davis of Actual Tech Media, and I'm serving today as the moderator. As always, we want these events to be educational, and we encourage your questions. We even have a best question prize to help maybe shake some questions loose if they're on your mind and you're not sure if you should ask them. We're all former IT professionals ourselves here at Actual Tech Media, and we know how tough it can be out there in the world of IT to protect your data, keep it safe, and help you to rapidly get that data back should the unexpected happen. So we encourage your questions. I know many of you will have questions, and we'll be taking those questions live at the end of the event there in the questions box of your audience console. Many of you have already said hello, good morning. We appreciate that. And I also want to call your attention to the handouts tab. It's there that you'll find a link right at the top to get started with Druva, which is the solution you'll be learning about on the event today. And then finally, at the end of the event, I'll be announcing the winner of our Amazon $300 gift card prize. Of course, if you're watching this on demand, that drawing has already occurred. The prize terms and conditions can be found right there in the handouts tab as well. And then, as I mentioned, we also have our Amazon $50 gift card for a best question prize, which means you have to ask a question to be entered into that prize drawing and meet the Actual Tech Media prize terms and conditions. All right, so with that out of the way, it's time to kick it off. I'm excited now to bring in our friend, Mr. W. Curtis Preston, Chief Technical Evangelist at Druva. Hey, Curtis, it's great to have you back on.
Always good to be on.
Excellent, excellent. Well, take it away, Curtis.
Thanks. All right, well, good afternoon, good morning, possibly where you are, it might be good evening. I wanted to talk about this concept of immutability, and it is something that it's a word that you're hearing a lot of these days. And so the title that I came up with was, is your immutable, as I make quotes, backup really immutable? Because there are a lot of products that are out there that throw this term around, and just wanted to talk about that. So the first question is, why are we hearing this term? I've been in this industry for going on almost 30 years now, and we really didn't throw around this term. The only time when you used to hear this had to do with like legal discovery, and you needed to be able to prove that the document that you're holding in court is the same as the document that was created 30 years ago. That's when you heard immutability, but suddenly we're hearing it all over. And I think it really goes back to one big thing and then a second thing. The first big thing is that tape back in the day, it automatically came with an air gap that all you had to do was hand it to a man in a van, and you just automatically got what we call an air gap, a gap of air between the thing that was being backed up and the thing that was and the actual backup. But what happened was we, as an industry, we pretty much moved over to disk-based backups, either on-prem or in the cloud. And the problem with many disk-based backups is they don't come with that automatic air gap. And so this was sort of a new problem that we created about 10 years ago. And then on top of that problem became, we added ransomware. And so you started to get ransomware that was infecting the primary systems, the things that we were backing up. And because you had an on-prem backup system that was essentially, sitting right there in the same server room, and quite possibly running the same operating system that the attack vector, which is typically Windows, not only Windows, but it's typically Windows, it allowed the ransomware tool, product, whatever you want to call it, to also infect the backup system and encrypt the backup system. And I talked about on-prem systems. It also was able to attack an off-prem copy if what you had is, if you had a server that was in another data center and you use that for your offsite backups, or if you had a server that was running in a VM in the cloud, because that server, in order to do the backups, because it was really in the beginning an on-prem backup server, in order to do that backup, it needs to have electronic access to it. And so even if you moved it into the cloud, the fact that it was in the cloud didn't offer you any additional protection from ransomware. The ransomware product would infect systems, it would infect the backup system, and then it could delete backups. One of the latest things is also they exfiltrate the backups and then delete them. So this has become a real problem, and so you're starting to see a lot of backup products talk about their immutability features, and I think that at least some of them, it's like the famous line from The Princess Bride. You keep using that word. I don't think it means what you think it means. So first off, let's just talk about what else could there be besides ransomware, because I think this is really important. Ransomware is really important, and right now I think it's the primary risk to your backup system, but it's not the only risk. And I want to mention 3 others. So first off, the biggest is, I think, one of the biggest possibilities is this idea of a disgruntled worker. This may be a backup admin, or it may be a system administrator, but it's someone who's become upset at the company because, let's say, they missed their bonus, or they didn't get the raise or the promotion that they wanted to have. There are many documented incidents throughout IT history of this happening, and there are many others that were much more private because they were embarrassing, and so the companies didn't talk about them. Another possibly more common thing is this idea of stolen credentials. We're hearing this all the time now, is that the biggest actually attack vector right now is not actually ransomware, it's phishing, right? So they do phishing attacks, and we're not perfect as IT people, and so sometimes your credentials are stolen. These may be the credentials to the backup system, or they may be the credentials to the system behind the backup system, right? So the backup system is whatever backup software you're running, and then behind that is generally a Windows or a Linux server. They could also steal the admin credentials to root or administrator of the actual server behind the backup system. And then finally, there is this concept of privilege escalation. So they don't steal the backup admin or the root or administrator password, but they manage to get a hold, either through whatever means, they manage to get a login of some sort to the system, and then they do what's called a privilege escalation attack, where they're able to become root via a number of things. I'd say the most recent and very public example is Log4j. So you're able to do some sort of exploit that gives you privileges on the server at a very high level. And Log4j, I think, sadly, it's in a lot of places. And that's example of the most recent thing of this idea of someone who didn't actually get hold of credentials. They just used some sort of exploit to gain privileges that they never would have had. And generally what we're talking about here is root or administrator privileges. And then from there, you can often get just about anything else. So there have been a number of attempts over the last many years to solve this risk, to address this challenge. And so let's just talk about a few of them. So first, and these are in no particular order, by the way, but just the first one I want to talk about is this idea of, so we've got an on-premises backup system. Again, that may also be a cloud system, but it's just backup software running in a VM in the cloud. I'm still considering that an on-premises system. What the deal is here is that we have this backup system, and they have a feature that says that in your backup software, you can specify that these backups, or all backups, that their expiration cannot be modified. So if you say the backups, when they're created, they're 90 days, you cannot undo that, right? So it's an optional feature, and if you turn it on, it means that even you, a privileged person within the system, cannot prematurely expire or delete these backups via the backup interface. So the problem is, what you can do is delete those files, because again, these are disk-based backups. They're just files on a backup system. You can delete those files if you have root or administrator privileges, okay? So it protects from a disgruntled backup admin, or if someone stole backup admin credentials, but it does not stop a ransomware attack. It doesn't stop if someone stole the root or administrator privileges, and it doesn't stop a privilege escalation pack. So I'm gonna call this not so immutable, right? So again, remember the title is your immutable backup really immutable? And I'm gonna say not so immutable. It protects against one of the attacks, but not the others. So the next is this idea of an append-only file system. So you say, okay, this file system can only be, you can only write new data to this file system. You can't write old data to it. You cannot delete old data via the file system, okay? And again, there are some backup systems that have that as a feature, but don't have the previous one that I talked about. So again, the point here is that that data is still deletable via a privileged account like root or administrator. For example, you could type newfs, which is a a Unix or Linux command. You can literally just create a new file system on top of the file system that stores the backup admin. You can't do it in the backup software, and you can't do it via ransomware. But if you are a privileged account, you could indeed wipe out that system. And so this does stop ransomware. It's a great thing to stop ransomware, but it doesn't stop any of the other attacks that I talked about earlier. So again, good for ransomware, not so much for a disgruntled worker or stolen credentials or privilege escalation. So again, I'm going to call this not so immutable. The next that we see is the idea. So again, the primary, not the only, but the primary attack vector for ransomware is Windows. We are seeing more attacks on Linux, and we're also seeing attacks specifically targeting VMware. But the primary attack vector is Windows. And one of the reasons for that is there's a lot more Windows laptops and desktops than there are anything else. And you get an attack that is based on a phishing attack against a single Windows user that happens to have VPN access or physical access to your data center. And they just have to exploit that one system. And then they use something like RDP to attack the other systems. And so what we have here is we have a file system that has there's a concept called the immutable flag, where that you can, when you create a file, you can say this file is created with the immutable flag. And so there are some that are referring to this as immutable Linux storage. And I'm saying, well, the thing is, it's immutable-ish, right? It protects, again, from a non-privileged user. It protects against a backup admin, either maliciously or accidentally going in and deleting a bunch of backups, because you can specify, again, going back to the first feature, like the first feature, I can say that when I create these backups with the backup software, the immutable flag gets set, so you can't then go in the backup software and delete those backups or prematurely expire them, which would cause them to be deleted. So it protects from a ransomware attack, because the ransomware wouldn't, two things. One is, if it's a Windows ransomware attack, it's not going to be able to attack that Linux system directly. If it's a, it also protects, even if it was a Linux-based attack, it's got the immutable flag. So unless they're able to compromise the account, then they wouldn't be able to delete or change that data. But if you are root on that Linux system, you can unset the immutable flag. It's just a chmod, right? So for those of you that are Linux folks, so it's just a chmod. I think it's -i, and poof, the immutable flag on that file is now gone, and you can delete that file. So again, if you're an attacker, if you're someone who is, actually I should have put an X on top of the disgruntled worker. If you're a disgruntled like admin person who has root on this Linux backup server, you would absolutely be able to delete these backups. So this does stop a ransomware attack, a disgruntled backup admin, and stolen backup admin credentials, because those wouldn't be able to attack it. But it doesn't stop if someone has root or administrator, and it doesn't stop if someone uses something like log4j to become root. So again, I'm going to say not so immutable. The next thing that you're seeing a lot of is this idea of copying at least one copy of the backups up to some type of cloud storage. Typically, it's looking something like S3 that has an object lock feature. So Amazon S3 has the ability to specify object lock to say, I'm going to give you this object, and when you write this object, don't even let me delete it. And I'm going to say, of all of these options that I've talked about so far, this is probably the best in terms of immutability. And the thing is that the one downside to this is that you generally have to pay for an on-prem copy and an off-prem copy. Most of these backup systems, at least at this point, don't directly write to S3 object lock. It's a copy that they make. So you generally have to have the on-prem system and then the off-prem and cloud copy. And the other thing is, while this is, again, as good as Immutable is going to get in a disk and cloud era, you can delete the immutable objects if you delete the AWS account. Now you immediately go, well, duh. So yes, that is very true. And you might wonder, well, does that ever happen? And yes, that has happened, both accidentally and maliciously. Companies have had their AWS accounts deleted. And when you delete an AWS account, it's gone. Everything in that account is gone. Any immutable objects, any backups in that account, any snapshots, the entire account is gone. If you want possibly the best story about it, there was a company called CodeSpaces. Look up CodeSpaces and that attack. It was several years ago, but basically a hacker, held them for ransom. They didn't pay the ransom, and he just deleted their account, and they ceased to exist at that moment. So this doesn't stop a disgruntled cloud admin. It stops a disgruntled backup admin, but not a disgruntled cloud admin. So if you have somebody that is, all powerful in the cloud, they could literally, in a single, probably a few keystrokes, delete the cloud account, and there is no backup of that account. And if you don't believe me, go try it. And then find, the idea of stolen cloud credentials. Now, I will say, give a caveat here. I sure hope that you've got multi-factor authentication turned on all your accounts, and definitely on your cloud account. So at least if someone stole the cloud privileges, you can at least stop this, because they wouldn't be able to use them if they had MFA enabled. And then, and also, I would hope that you are using the idea of least privilege in your cloud account. But again, I don't know how your cloud account is set up. You look at what happened with CodeSpaces. They didn't have MFA on. They didn't have least privilege concept enabled. And so the idea is the all-powerful account that should be able to, delete the world, there should be like one person with that. And maybe nobody has it, and it's a password that is escrowed somewhere, right? So, but the point is that even with this, which I think is about as good as you can do by yourself, even that could be deleted. And then finally, we have this idea of a SaaS-based data resilience system. Now, this is the way Druva does things. And the idea is that the difference here is this is a cloud service in our account, not a cloud service in your account. And the service has immutability features built into it. You get no access to the cloud account. Meaning like in our case, our technology runs in AWS. You get no access to AWS on our platform. You don't, no one else does. And you, therefore, you would not be able to stop that. I mean, if you were a disgruntled worker or something, you would not be able to get access because you just don't have that access. And also, and this is a really important thing to understand, because I don't want to sound, duplicitous here. Yes, we are running on AWS, but we have enacted all of the best measures that is possible to make doing anything catastrophic in AWS possible, right? We have stopped that. And also, for example, we've configured things in the most secure way possible so that your backups, when they're stored in S3, which is where we do store your backups, even us, even if we had the all-powerful cloud admin account, we can't access that data. We can't either view it or modify it or delete it. Only the backup app is configured to be able to either append or delete data from the S3. And so this does stop a ransomware attack, because if you have anything happening either in your on-prem system, your cloud-based accounts, there's just literally no route for the ransomware attack to take to get to that system. Again, a disgruntled backup admin, he or she would not be able to delete the data because there isn't anything within the backup app to allow them to do that. And I know that in the case of Druva, we have a couple different levels, one that's coming a little bit more soon. And then right now, if the absolute worst happens, the disgruntled backup admin deleted some backups that they shouldn't have, or accidentally deleted something that they shouldn't have, we actually have the concept of a recycle bin built into the backups that is a user configurable amount of time that the backups, when you delete backups, they don't actually get deleted. They get deleted after a period of time, and then you can easily go in and recover that data. And then we're going to make that even better here soon. And also the again, as I mentioned, even if someone got a hold of the cloud privileges, even someone in cloud ops in our side isn't able to do the bad things that we're worried about happening. It requires many levels of escalation and all that stuff to do, I'm just going to say bad stuff, to delete or modify data. And obviously the most, I'm going to say the most vetted cloud infrastructure in the world is AWS. I'm not going to say it's the best. It's where we happen to, but I will say that it is, I think it's pretty safe to say that it is the most vetted cloud infrastructure in the world. And so I'm going to say this is actually immutable, that it addresses all four of the attack vectors that we have today. It also it does indeed address ransomware, and it also addresses all these other ways to attack backups that many of our competitors do not address. And let's see here. So if you're not familiar with Druva, we have over 4,000 customers. We're built natively on AWS, 150 petabyte plus under management. And you can read all about us in Forrester and Gartner reports, doing very well there, leaders and visionaries in those reports. Great reviews on the review sites. If you're not familiar with us, give us a shot. And it's an entirely SaaS-based backup system where you literally just have to either install, something in VMware, or install an agent in a physical server, or give us access to either a SaaS service we're backing up or an AWS service we're backing up. And then we just literally, magic happens after that. You don't have to configure or manage any of the infrastructure behind your backup system. So with that, I say thank you, and I'm going to hand things back over to David.
Great presentation, Curtis. As always, this is some exciting new content there from you and Druva. So excited to learn more about how not all immutability is the same. And we got a lot of great questions coming in. I encourage your questions out there in the audience. If you have something on your mind, now's the time to get it in. I'll go ahead and just start with, let's see, this question from Warren, who's asking, what would you say is the number one thing to do to protect the data? Having multiple backup images, is that recommended?
Yeah, that's it's hard. It's sort of like if I did nothing else, right? So to me, it's like if I did only one thing. If I did only one thing, I would be making sure that my copy, whatever that copy is air gapped. Okay, there are multiple ways to get an air gap. Back in the day, the easiest way was to put it on tape and give it to a man in a van. Today, again, I know that I work for Druva, and it's going to sound like whatever, but to me, the easiest way to get an air gap copy today is to give it to a service that is installed on infrastructure that you have no access to, and the attacker would have no access to. So I'd say if I had, well, but the problem is I would have to also mention other things like encrypting it in transit, encrypting it while you're storing it so that no one can use it as an attack vector to steal your data. But in terms of protecting it from modification, which is really what we're talking about today, I would say that the number one thing would have to be air gapped.
Okay, good advice. Daniel's asking, how does Druva protect a restore that may have been hit with dormant malicious software in one of the backups?
That is a great question. So two things. I want to separate between the idea of a backup that has been infected with malware and a backup that has been encrypted, right? These are two different phases of a ransomware attack. So we do monitor the backups for malicious activity. And so we do not want to consider ourselves like a ransomware monitoring tool. There are tools that will actually look for and actively stop ransomware. What we can detect using things like machine learning and AI, that we detect a behavioral change in your backups, right? So things like your backups are normally right around 30 terabytes every day, and then suddenly they're 100 terabytes. Why? We throw off an alert, depending on your configuration, we might pause the backups for you, notify you. But the real challenge for any backup software is what happens if you have a long dwell time. So you get the infection, and then some period of time happens. And the real danger is when you do the infection, and then if they're encrypting files slowly in the background. This is another new tactic, is they slowly encrypt files that nobody's looking at. And then when you actually notice it or you get notified you have a ransomware attack, they've actually been encrypting files for, let's say, 2 weeks or even longer. The median dwell time of a ransomware attack is now over 30 days. Oh. So how do we handle that? Well, one is you will need to do some research, some legwork to figure out when that infection occurred. We can help you with that, but there are tools that can help you do that. And then once you identify that, let's say it's what's today, February 9th. Let's say your ransomware infection was on January 15th. You would ask us to do a ransomware restore, and we can specify start the restore on the 14th and restore up to the 9th. And what we're able to do is two things. One is we can restore the most recent unencrypted version of every file in a single pass, which is something no other backup product can do today. Yeah. And then the second is, as we're doing that restore, we're also scanning for the malware itself. So by this point in an attack, you know what has attacked you, and you can upload the definition of the actual malware that attacked you, and we can scan for that malware, during the restore to make sure that we do not reinfect the system that we're restoring. So I think that is as good as a solution as I think you could possibly have, given the stuff that we're dealing with.
Absolutely, yeah, that's cool. I didn't realize that Druva could do all that. Let's see, answering that one. Next one here, Lucas wants to know, didn't some LTO tape and worm capabilities represent immutability in the past?
Yeah. Again, back in the day, right? I grew up a tape guy, and I'm possibly the most pro tape guy at a no tape company. But back in the day, LTO had and has worm capability. But here's a little interesting thing. We talk about immutability today like it's a binary condition. Your backup either has or doesn't have immutability. And this is sort of why I've been saying not so immutable, more immutable, less immutable. Immutability isn't so much a binary condition as it addresses multiple risks. Let me take LTO worm tape. So is that immutable? Absolutely. Is it 100% immutable? Nope. Why is that? Because it's just a tape. If I can get physical access to that tape, its immutability goes right out the window. All I got to do, I need a torch, I need some scissors, I need some whatever, and that immutable tape is going to be would be mutable. I don't know. I guess it would be changeable by physical access, and also by theft and other things, right? So even what I think of as the most immutable thing we ever had was not 100% immutable. We still have that. And let me just address a related question. Why don't we just use tape? I don't have time to answer that question. Suffice it to say that tape is really no longer compatible with the way we do backups. A real quick answer, and it's the opposite of what most people think. The problem with tape today is that it's actually too fast, that the backups run slower than the tape wants to run. The two technologies are actually fundamentally incompatible. Tape is incapable of running really slow, and the backups are not capable of running any faster. And so we do all sort of things to deal with that. But in the end, that's how they became incompatible with operational backup. So we use them for long-term archive. Some people do use them for a last-ditch Hail Mary DR copy that they really hope they never use. And I guess what we're saying is, well, instead of doing that, look at a service that will do all of that, give you the air gap, make sure you have 3 copies, make sure all of them are offsite, and without having to do any of that work.
Okay, interesting. I always learn a lot when I chat with you. Alyssa's asking if you can help to explain the air gap to executives and why the old way or the cloud doesn't solve the backup problem.
So, that's how do you explain anything to executives? Well,
The age-old challenge there.
Yeah, you need to put it in business terms, right? So they need to understand the risk that you've got an attack, whether it's just a straight hacker attack or a ransomware attack. It can modify data, right? Hopefully they should be able to understand that. And if it can modify this computer, if it can modify computer A, it can modify computer B. And if computer B happens to be, the backup server, then it can modify the backups. Just Google, the ransomware encrypted my backups. There's a ton of examples out there. You can show that basically the companies have been left with no choice but to pay the ransomware money. Now you're speaking their language, that the backups, if they're encrypted, you're left with no other choice but to pay the ransom. And that is hopefully something they will understand. And again, I'm not against tape. I'm not against having a tape copy of, again, it's a salt mine. I hope I don't ever have to use a copy. I think tape is quite possibly the worst way to do DR, but it's the best way if you have no other choice, right? So the tape issue is that's explaining to them why tape doesn't really work. It's a bigger challenge, I think.
Okay, good advice. Lucas here is asking about what about immutability using tape retention and object locks in AWS?
Yeah, again, I think there's nothing wrong. So I think I've already addressed the object lock with AWS. The only risk, I think it's outside of what we do, I think it's probably the best choice. The downsides to it are the fact that you're generally paying for 2 copies, the on-prem copy and the off-prem copy. And then the other is it is still deletable. If you have a disgruntled cloud admin or someone gains access to the cloud account, they can delete the cloud account. And when that happens, your backups are immediately deleted. So, and then regarding the tape retention thing, that would imply that you're using tape as part of a regular backup system, which again, I haven't recommended for well over 10 years. And I've only worked at Druva for 4 for the record. By the way, I'll give a shout out to the book. My book, Modern Data Protection, got published in May, O'Reilly and Associates. You can find it on Amazon. And I cover all of this, why tape actually became really problematic in backups.
Awesome. Yeah, I've seen that book and I need to read it. I've heard great things about it. So I encourage everyone to check it out. Modern Data Protection on Amazon by Wiley Publishing. Here's another good question. O'Reilly. Sorry, O'Reilly.
Yeah, Wiley, that's a whole other company.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, another question here. Terry wants to know if something's truly immutable, how can I delete it when it's no longer needed?
Yeah. So the way like object lock works or the immutable flag in a Linux system, it's set to be immutable for its retention period. So you specify, I want to make this object immutable for 90 days. And after 90 days, it gets automatically deleted. What happens is, the immutable flag is set for that period, and then it can be deleted. And so the backup system that automatically deletes. Regarding the whole expiry date, I don't know the direct answer to that in Linux. I think that particular exploit might be noticed, but they don't need to do that. If they've got enough power to change the time, that means they have root. If they have root, all they got to do is chmod -i on the file, and now it's not immutable anymore, and they can delete it as soon as they want.
Yeah, and that was his follow-up question is, if I can delete it when it's no longer needed, couldn't a bad actor do the same?
Yeah, and short answer is yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see, another question here. So many great questions here. What about an anti-malware attack before the data lands to AWS S3?
Not sure what that means.
You might have to get back to that person on more information.
So I think the idea might be, I get the question is if they I'm trying to understand what the question is, but I don't quite get the. We encrypt the data at the very beginning we dedupe the data and encrypt the data at the very beginning of the process before it's ever sent. And then we encrypt it again on the other side with AES 256. So there should be a way to, should not be a way for ransomware to infect, in the middle of that process, as far as the encryption the attack at the beginning. The idea obviously is that we're protecting the data all the time. And so we'll be there before the ransomware. If a file is created today and you can specify to back up as often as once every hour. If you created a file right now and you specified only to back up once a night and you get a ransomware attack this afternoon, there's not much we can do. So if you're concerned with that, then I would create a tighter RPO for that system and restore or specify to back up once an hour. And on the laptops, we can actually do even more frequently that. Yeah.
Cody's asking, wouldn't a SaaS-based solution also be at risk of an angry admin attack?
Yeah, it's a great and a fair question. So it is not subject to an angry admin from the customer attack, because it could be if the backup software system behind the SaaS app doesn't have any features to address that. So there are SaaS apps, for example, that have sort of typical retention. And if you go into that and you're an admin in that system, you could just say, hey, these backups, just expire them early. And yes, that would be an attack that would be successful. With the way Druva addresses it, we have a current solution, which I'm going to call a stopgap solution, which is if that were to happen, in advance to that happening, you can specify a period of time where if someone goes in and either accidentally or maliciously deletes the backups, we're able to bring those backups. The quickest way to call that is a recycle bin for your backups. And you can specify, I want to do that for, whatever period of time you think is appropriate. The only caveat there is the longer you specify as that recovery period, the more storage you're going to take up, and the storage on Druva is what you end up paying for, right? So because we charge you, once a month for the amount of deduplicated data that we store on your behalf. So increasing that retention period, it will have, I will say, a slight increase on cost, but due to source side deduplication, it shouldn't be ridiculous. But anyway, that's the solution today. And then we have another solution coming around the quarter that will be even better. And I'll call it even more immutable, which is, again, some people see as a binary condition and I do not.
Yeah, I like that. The sliding scale there of immutability.
Yeah, real quick. And regarding the cloud admin accounts, those need to be protected. Again, I can only speak to what Druva does, and we have many, many levels of protection to prevent, because we could have a disgruntled admin, right? So we have many, many layers of protection against that. We do all the best practices according to the way AWS does things. So there couldn't be a single disgruntled cloud admin that could do that kind of damage to a Druva customer.
Excellent. Here's an interesting one. They say, if I don't have root to my backup appliance, how could a hacker have root?
Yeah, great question. So this is actually pretty common. So that you're seeing these sort of purpose-built backup appliances where the customer doesn't get root, so how do I, how could a hacker get it? Well, again, we're going to go to that privilege escalation, either using something like Log4j or some other buffer problem, buffer overrun or whatever, and then the user, the hacker, either gains direct, like with Log4j, they don't need any privileges, and boom, they can execute any arbitrary code that they want with a privileged account. And that's why Log4j is just such that, and the fact that it's everywhere. But it's just the latest example, and by the time this thing has been played for a couple of months, there'll be another example. There are numerous ways throughout the years that a person is able to gain administrative access to a system that they didn't even have login privileges initially. So that's a long answer for a short question, but.
Okay. I know we were trying to kind of keep this short. We've got 30 questions still.
Lord.
Curtis? Huh?
I said, Lord.
You want to wrap up at this point? Are there any further questions you want to cover?
Well, let me just scroll through. Are there chain of custody reports? Yes. Just see if there's any that really. Yeah, I like the shoot. There's nothing that can be done to completely protect it. I guess it's not that nothing can be done. It's just that, and again, I understand that I work for Druva, and you may dismiss what I say because of that. But again, I've been in the backup space for 30 years, and I believe this idea strongly, and that is, if you have physical access to a system, there is literally nothing that you can do to 100% protect it, because with physical access, you can do anything. You can boot a system to a USB stick, and now you're not running on that system. You're running on the USB stick, and now you have direct access to all the devices that are in there. There are just things that you can do with an on-prem backup system or a cloud version of an on-prem backup system that you just can't do if no one, including you and privileged people at your system, if you don't have access to them at all, either physical access or admin access of any kind. There are exploits that just cannot be done with a system like Druva, where on the other end, there is nothing that can stop a determined, disgruntled person with root, and we've seen that throughout the years, and it's just a reality of where we live.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I'll wrap up. I hope this is helpful. I mean, I know it's a touchy subject. There are a lot of companies that are throwing around the term immutable. They're also throwing around the word air gapped. They're saying this server is air gapped because it has an on-prem, or it has this or that feature. I'm like, the concept of air gap is that there's no way to get from A to B. It's a physical server sitting on the site, and I just addressed that already. That's not air gapped, and it's also it's immutable-ish, right? It's on one side not immutable at all, on the other side 100% immutable, like worm LTO. But even that, as I said, was not ever 100% immutable, right? So there's 95% immutable and there's 0% immutable. It's better than nothing, but I think I've described that there are a number of attacks that can exploit the limitations there, and they can come either from a direct attacker or even just like an accidental person, right? Sometimes, one of the greatest examples that I have, and it's the name of the company is escaping me, but there was a company that deleted their entire Google Apps account, and the entire company's IP was stored in G Drive. And a well-meaning admin thought he was deleting the test account, but he deleted the production account. And literally, the company's entire IP ceased to exist that day. And with these products that just have this feature or that feature, even a well-meaning backup person might go in and accidentally delete a whole bunch of backups. You have to protect from all of the things, not just a ransomware attack. And I guess that's the thing that I would leave with.
Excellent. Yeah, I mean, I learned a lot on this. I know now that immutability is not just a checkbox. Like, is it immutable or not? There's a lot more to it than that, and we need to really educate ourselves on exactly what a solution means by immutable. So
yeah, I would just say the one question I would ask is, these are the 4 things that could potentially impact our backups. How do you, backup vendor person, how does your product address these risks? Because generally what you'll find is that they just go after immutability, or they just go after ransomware. They don't address the other risks. How do you address the risk of privilege escalation, or the risk of a disgruntled person who happens to have root, right? How do you address, or a disgruntled backup admin? By the way, there's a few of us. Anyway, and so how do you address those risks? I'm doing a very broad comparison of a lot of different ways to do this, and you have to speak directly to your backup vendor and say, how does your product address these issues?
excellent. All right. Well, I think that's a great place to wrap up here. Before we go, I want to remind everyone about the Get Started with Druva link right there in your handouts tab. That'll take you to druva.com. And there is a 30-day trial, free trial right there. You can sign up for and check out the Druva solution for yourself. We encourage everyone to do that. Curtis, it's always a pleasure having you on. I always learn a lot. Thank you so much.
Anytime.
And thank you to everyone out there in the audience for joining us today. I do want to announce the winner of our Amazon $300 gift card. This is going to Jordan Wharton from Maryland. Congratulations, Jordan Wharton from Maryland. Thank you to everyone who joined us, and we'll see you next time. Have a great day.